Title: The Sacred Spring and the Sword of Promise. In a land where the winds whispered ancient secrets, and the mountains held the wisdom of centuries, there existed a hidden sanctuary, the sacred spring. It was said to possess the power to heal not just the body, but the soul itself. Many sought it, but none could find it except for those destined by fate. Our story begins with a young warrior, Aldrich, who embarks on a journey that will change his life forever. Little did he know, his path was intertwined with an ancient prophecy, one that had been whispered through generations. Aldrich stood before the ancient oak tree, its gnarled branches reaching out like the arms of a forgotten god. The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying with it a message only he could understand. Aldrich, the voice whispered, your destiny awaits. The sacred spring lies beyond the mountains, and only you can unlock its power. But beware, for the sword of promise has been lost to time. Without it, the spring's power will fade into legend. Aldrich clenched his fists, the weight of the prophecy pressing down upon him. The sacred spring had been a tale passed down by elders, a story he had long believed to be nothing more than myth. But now, it seemed real. His journey had begun. The journey was treacherous. The dense forests gave way to jagged cliffs, and the rivers that once flowed gently had turned into roaring torrents. Aldrich, undeterred, pressed on. His heart burned with purpose, his thoughts consumed by the mystery of the sacred spring. It was during a night under the stars that he encountered an old man, bent with age but eyes gleaming with knowledge. Young one, the old man said, his voice raspy but clear, you seek the sacred spring, but you must first find the sword of promise. It is said to be hidden in the Valley of Shadows, guarded by the spirit of the ancients. Aldrich nodded, grateful for the guidance. The Valley of Shadows was a place he had heard of in stories, an eerie realm where time itself seemed to stand still, and creatures of the night roamed freely. Yet, if the sword was there, he had no choice but to face the darkness. The Valley of Shadows was more terrifying than Aldrich could have imagined. The air was thick with mist, and the shadows seemed to move on their own, whispering forgotten tales of the past. As Aldrich ventured deeper into the valley, he could feel the weight of centuries pressing down upon him. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and from the depths of the earth, a creature emerged, eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was the guardian of the sword, a spirit bound by duty and time. You are brave to come this far, the spirit said, its voice like the wind through dead leaves. But the sword you seek can only be wielded by one who understands the true meaning of promise. Do you, young warrior, know the cost of such a vow? Aldrich hesitated, but he knew what he had to do. I will protect the spring, he declared, his voice firm. I promise to honor its power and keep it from falling into darkness. The spirit nodded, its form dissolving into mist, leaving behind the sword of promise. It was a blade like no other, forged in the heart of the sacred fire and tempered by the waters of the spring itself. Aldrich took the sword in his hands, feeling its power surge through him. With the sword in hand, Aldrich continued his journey. Days turned into weeks, and his body grew weary, but his spirit remained unyielding. He reached the foot of the mountain that concealed the sacred spring, its waters glowing faintly in the moonlight. But as he approached, he was confronted by a figure draped in shadow, the dark sorcerer, a being of pure malice who sought to claim the power of the spring for himself. The spring is mine, the sorcerer hissed. With its power, I will rule this land and bend all to my will. Aldrich raised the sword of promise, its blade shimmering with a light that seemed to repel the darkness. I will not let you corrupt its power, he said, his voice steady. A fierce battle ensued, the sword clashing against the sorcerer's dark magic. The ground shook, and the very air seemed to crackle with energy. But Aldrich, driven by his promise, stood firm. With one final strike, he pierced the sorcerer's heart, breaking the spell that had bound him to the world of darkness. With the sorcerer defeated, Aldrich stood at the edge of the sacred spring. Its waters were no longer darkened by evil, but glowed with a soft, radiant light. As Aldrich knelt to drink from its waters, he felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. The burden of his journey had ended, and the promise he had made was fulfilled. The waters of the spring healed not only his body, but his heart. The pain of loss, the weight of his destiny, all of it faded away. Aldrich had become the protector of the spring, and his bond with the land was unbreakable. Years passed, and Aldrich's name became legend. The sacred spring flourished, its waters a source of life for all who sought its healing touch. The sword of promise, once a symbol of power, became a symbol of hope and protection. Aldrich, now an old man, stood by the spring, watching as the sun set behind the mountains. He had fulfilled his destiny, and in doing so, had brought peace to a world that had once been torn by darkness. And so, the story of the sacred spring and the sword of promise was passed down through the ages. A tale of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds of promise. Years after Aldrich had defeated the dark sorcerer, a strange change began to take place in the land. The once peaceful village at the base of the mountains began to notice unsettling winds, whispers carried by the breeze, whispers of something dark returning. Aldrich, now known as the guardian of the sacred spring, sensed a disturbance in the balance of nature. The spring, which had once flowed pure and untainted, began to tremble beneath his feet. The whispers seemed to grow louder, and even the mighty sword of promise, once calm in his hand, began to vibrate as if responding to an unseen force. One quiet night, Aldrich stood alone beside the spring, staring at the shimmering waters that had healed so many. But tonight, the reflection that stared back at him was not his own. The image in the water shifted, revealing a dark figure clad in tattered robes, with eyes glowing like embers. It was a spirit from the past. "You have fulfilled your promise, Aldrich," the figure said, its voice like the crackling of fire. "But there are forces older than time itself that stir beneath the earth. They seek the spring, for it holds more power than you know." Aldrich tightened his grip on the sword of promise, feeling its pulse with a sudden sense of urgency. "Who are you?" he demanded. "And what do you seek?" The spirit laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the mountains. "I am the keeper of lost souls. You defeated the sorcerer, yes. But what you do not understand is that the spring's power is bound to the soul of the world. It can heal, but it can also corrupt." Aldrich's heart skipped a beat. He had always known the spring held immense power, but he had never considered that it could bring harm. The very essence of life and death was entwined within it. The keeper continued, "The ancient powers that guard the spring are awakening. You, Aldrich, are the key to its salvation or its ruin." The next morning, Aldrich called upon the wisest of the village elders to seek guidance. She was a woman who had seen many winters, her eyes filled with the wisdom of ages. "The spring is not just a source of life, Aldrich," she explained gravely. "It is the heart of the world, the very pulse of nature itself. Its waters flow through every living thing. If it falls into the wrong hands, the balance of all life will be shattered." Aldrich listened intently. The weight of his responsibility pressed down on him harder than ever. "What must I do?" he asked. "How can I protect it from those who seek to corrupt it?" The elder looked at him, her face stern but kind. "The sword of promise is not only a weapon, it is a symbol. It represents the vow you made to protect the sacred waters. But it can also open the path to the heart of the spring, where its true power lies. You must go deeper into the mountain than ever before, to the core of the sacred land, where the spring's source lies hidden. Determined to safeguard the spring, Aldrich embarked on a perilous journey. He ventured deep into the heart of the mountain, through caverns that seemed to stretch on forever, and across dark, uncharted lands. As he descended, the air grew heavy, and the whispers of the wind began to grow louder, as if urging him forward. The deeper he went, the more he could feel the ancient power of the spring. It was a feeling of both awe and dread, as though the very earth was alive and watching him. As he approached the center of the mountain, Aldrich found a great chamber, a cavern so vast it seemed to have no end. At the center, the waters of the sacred spring flowed from a crystalline fountain, glowing with an ethereal light. But as he stepped closer, the ground trembled. The air crackled with energy, and a figure emerged from the shadows. It was not the keeper, but something far older, an elemental spirit, one of the ancient forces that had once protected the world but had now grown wild with hunger. "You have come," the spirit boomed, its voice like a storm, "but you are too late. The balance has already begun to tilt. The spring's power cannot be contained by one soul alone. It must be shared, or it will consume everything." Aldrich drew the sword of promise, its blade shining with the light of his vow. "I will not let you destroy what I have sworn to protect," he said, his voice unwavering. The spirit raised its hand, and the mountain trembled as the earth cracked beneath them. The battle for the heart of the sacred spring had begun. The battle raged on for hours, the elements themselves tearing at Aldrich's very being. Lightning struck the earth, and the air became thick with the raw power of nature. Yet Aldrich fought on, the sword of promise glowing brighter with each strike. The elemental spirit, with its immense power, was nearly invincible. But Aldrich, fueled by the memories of his promise, the trust of the villagers, and the weight of his duty, did not falter. With one final, thunderous strike, he plunged the sword of promise into the heart of the spring's source, channeling all of his strength into the blade. The ground shook violently, and the light from the sword surged, engulfing the spirit in a brilliant flash. When the light faded, the spirit was gone, its presence erased from the world. Aldrich stood amidst the stillness, his body exhausted, but his heart at peace. The balance had been restored. Aldrich returned to the village, where he was greeted as a hero. But despite the victory, he knew his journey was far from over. The sword of promise would remain with him, a reminder of the vow he had made. As the years passed, Aldrich grew older, and the people of the village flourished under the protection of the sacred spring. The waters, once again calm, healed the wounded and nourished the land. But the spring's true power, the power to heal, protect, and renew, was guarded by Aldrich, the eternal guardian. And so, the legend of the sacred spring and the sword of promise was passed down, not as a tale of battle and victory, but as a story of a promise kept, of a hero who stood against darkness to protect the heart of the world. Years passed, and Aldrich grew old. His once fiery spirit had calmed, but the weight of the sword of promise still carried the legacy of his vow. In the quiet moments by the sacred spring, he would often reflect on the battles, the sacrifices, and the promise he had made to protect the land. One day, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Aldrich sat by the spring, his fingers tracing the cool surface of the water. He had seen many come and go, but one young soul stood out among the others, Leora, a bright and determined girl from the village. She had grown up listening to the tales of Aldrich's deeds, of the sword of promise, and of the sacred waters. Leora had always felt a deep connection to the spring, as though it was calling to her, though she could never explain why. Aldrich had noticed her devotion to the spring. She would often sit by its edge, her eyes reflecting the shimmering waters, as if she was waiting for something. One evening, he approached her. You seem troubled, child, he said gently. Leora looked up, startled, but then smiled. I've always felt a deep pull to this place. It's as if I'm meant to do something here, to protect it, just as you have. Aldrich studied her closely. There was something about Heron energy, a potential he hadn't seen in others before. Perhaps it is time for you to learn the true nature of the spring, he said, standing slowly. Come with me. Aldrich led Leora deep into the mountains, to the place where the sacred spring's true source flowed. The path was treacherous, and the air thick with the power of the earth. As they arrived at the heart of the spring, the waters sparkled with an ancient energy. The very air hummed with the force of life. Leora stood in awe, her heart racing. She had heard the legends, but standing here, feeling the raw power of the spring, was something else entirely. Aldrich turned to her. The spring is more than just a source of life, he explained. It is the very lifeblood of the world. It heals, it nurtures, but it can also destroy if misused. That is why it is our duty to protect it. The sword of promise was forged to guard this power. Leora's eyes widened. The sword of promise? I've heard of it, but... You mean to say that I? Aldrich nodded gravely. You have the spirit of a guardian, Leora. The sword can only be wielded by one who has proven their worth. Someone who understands the true meaning of the vow. It is a weapon, yes, but it is also a responsibility. You must decide, child. Will you accept this duty? For a long moment, Leora stood in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady. I will protect the spring, just as you did. Aldrich smiled and handed her the sword of promise. The moment her fingers closed around the hilt, the sword pulsed with light, as if acknowledging her choice. As Leora began her training under Aldrich's watchful eye, the village slowly settled into peace once again. But the world, as it often does, was never truly free from darkness. Far to the north, in the forgotten corners of the earth, a new threat stirred. A sorceress, hungry for the power of the sacred spring, had learned of its existence and its true potential. Her name was Vespera, and she was unlike any foe Aldrich had ever faced. Where the dark sorcerer had sought to destroy, Vespera sought to control. She understood the true nature of the spring's power and knew that by harnessing it, she could command the very forces of life and death. Leora had just begun to learn the ways of the Guardian when Aldrich felt a shift in the air. The whispers had returned darker now, more urgent. He knew that the time was coming for her to face her first trial. It would not be an easy path, but she had the strength within her. He had no doubt. One night, the ground trembled. A shadow fell over the village, and the wind howled like a banshee. Vespera had arrived. The clash between Leora and Vespera was inevitable. The village watched in silent terror as the two forces of nature collided. Vespera, with her dark magic, summoned storms and twisted the earth beneath their feet. Leora, with the sword of promise, fought back with the purity of the spring's light, its power flowing through her as she had learned from Aldrich. The battle was fierce. Vespera's power seemed endless, and Leora struggled to keep up. But then, at the heart of the chaos, Leora remembered Aldrich's teachings. The sword was not merely a weapon. It was a symbol. It represented the promise to protect, to heal, and to preserve life. With that thought in her heart, Leora called upon the true power of the spring. As she raised the sword of promise, the light from the blade surged forward, cutting through the darkness that surrounded them. The very earth seemed to respond, the wind stilled, and the waters of the spring glowed brighter than ever. Vespera screamed as the light enveloped her, her dark magic faltering. You cannot stop me, she yelled. The spring's power is mine to control. But Leora stood firm, her eyes locked on the sorceress. No, she said calmly. The spring belongs to the world. It belongs to all who protect it. With one final swing, Leora struck, and the darkness was shattered. Vespera, defeated, vanished into the winds. With the battle won, peace returned once again to the land. Leora, now a true guardian of the sacred spring, stood at the edge of the waters, the sword of promise at her side. Aldrich, his age finally catching up to him, smiled as he watched her. He had passed on the mantle, and now the spring would be in good hands. The sun rose over the horizon, casting golden light over the peaceful village. The sacred spring flowed calmly once more, its waters healing the land and its people. And so, the legacy of the spring continued, carried on by those who understood its true power, and who vowed to protect it for generations to come. Years passed, and Leora's wisdom as the guardian of the sacred spring grew. She had mastered the power of the sword of promise, wielding it not only as a weapon but as a tool of healing and protection. Her connection to the spring deepened with each passing day, and the land thrived under her watchful care. But even in times of peace, the winds of change are always stirring. Rumors began to spread of strange disturbances, ripples in the fabric of reality itself. A dark force, different from the one that Vespera had commanded, was emerging from the farthest corners of the world. Whispers told of a creature from beyond the veil of time, a being known only as the Hollow King. It was said that the Hollow King sought to drain the very essence of the sacred spring, using its power to open a portal to a forgotten world, a world where death reigned and life was no more. Leora knew that this would be her greatest challenge yet. The very balance of life itself was at stake. Leora stood at the edge of the sacred spring, staring into its depths, contemplating the threat ahead. The spring, once calm and peaceful, now seemed to pulse with an unsettling energy. The Hollow King's arrival was imminent. Aldrich's teachings echoed in her mind. A guardian is not only a protector of life, but a keeper of balance. It is your duty to face the darkness, to maintain the balance between light and shadow, life and death. With determination in her heart, Leora set off to find the source of the disturbances. The path led her deep into the mountains, beyond the lands she had once known. The journey was perilous, and as she ventured farther, she felt a presence, a cold, suffocating darkness that seemed to follow her every step. As she reached the heart of the forgotten world, she encountered the Hollow King. He was not a man, but a being of pure shadow, his form constantly shifting, his presence overwhelming. His eyes were like black voids, consuming everything in their gaze. "You are too late," the Hollow King's voice echoed, hollow and lifeless. "The sacred spring will be mine, and with it, I will open the door to a world where nothing lives, where nothing grows. The cycle of life and death will be undone." Leora stood tall, gripping the sword of promise with both hands. "I won't let you destroy the balance. I will protect the spring, no matter the cost." The Hollow King laughed, his voice like the sound of crumbling earth. "You cannot stop me. The sword of promise is nothing compared to the power I seek. All you have is your light. But I am the shadow that devours it." Leora's heart raced, but she steadied herself. She had faced darkness before, and she would do so again. The sword of promise shimmered brightly in her hands, its light flickering like a beacon in the dark. With a fierce cry, she charged at the Hollow King. The battle was like none Leora had ever fought before. The Hollow King's darkness seemed to warp reality itself, bending the very air around them. His shadowy tendrils reached out to engulf her, but Leora was swift, her sword cutting through the dark like a blazing star. Each strike she delivered was a clash of light against shadow, a testament to her strength and resolve. The Hollow King's form seemed endless, constantly shifting and evading her blows. But Leora's connection to the sacred spring gave her the strength she needed. As the battle raged on, the spring's power surged through her, feeding her with its energy. She could feel its pulse, steady and strong, in her veins. With one final, powerful strike, Leora thrust the sword of promise into the heart of the Hollow King. The light from the sword erupted in a blinding flash, consuming the shadow in an instant. The Hollow King let out a final, soul-rending scream before he was torn apart by the light. As the darkness faded, the world around Leora began to heal. The land, once withered and cold, slowly came back to life. The sacred spring, too, regained its former glow, its waters now purer than ever before. Leora knelt by the spring, her breath heavy from the battle. She had protected the balance, but she knew that the fight for the sacred spring was never truly over. Darkness would always seek to return, but as long as there were guardians to stand watch, the light would prevail. Leora returned to her village, her heart filled with a sense of peace. The people greeted her as a hero, but she knew that her role as a guardian was far from complete. She had learned the true nature of the spring, that it was not just a source of life, but a symbol of the balance between all things. Light and darkness, life and death, both were essential to the world's existence. She stood once again by the sacred spring, gazing into its depths. The water shimmered, reflecting the beauty of the world around her. The sword of promise lay at her side, ready for whatever challenges might arise. But for now, there was peace. And in this moment, Leora understood what it meant to be a guardian, to protect not only the spring but the delicate balance that allowed life to flourish. As the sun set, casting golden light across the waters, Leora made a silent vow to the sacred spring. She would carry on the legacy, for as long as it took, ensuring that the balance would remain undisturbed for generations to come. As time passed, Leora's story became one of legend, passed down through the generations. The sacred spring remained a symbol of hope and renewal, a place where life was nurtured and protected. And though new threats would arise, new guardians would always be chosen, ready to stand against the darkness and protect the sacred waters. The sword of promise, now a part of Leora's legacy, would never be forgotten. It would remain, forever, a beacon of light in the face of shadow. Years passed, and the peace that Leora had fought so fiercely to protect remained intact. The sacred spring flourished, its waters clearer and more vibrant than ever. Under her watch, the lands prospered, and the people lived in harmony with nature. But as with all things, change was inevitable. The world continued to evolve, and the balance Leora had fought to preserve began to shift once more. The winds of fate carried whispers of a new, unknown force of presence that was both ancient and powerful. It was not a darkness, but something far more complex, a force that sought to challenge the very nature of existence. Leora, now an elder, sensed the stirrings of this new force in her bones. She knew her time as the guardian was nearing its end, and it was time to pass on her legacy. One evening, under the light of 1,000 stars, Leora gathered the young ones, those who had been chosen to follow in her footsteps. Among them was a bright-eyed girl named Nira, whose heart was filled with the same sense of duty and purpose that had once burned within Leora. Nira had been drawn to the sacred spring from a young age, feeling a connection to its waters that was unspoken but undeniable. "Are you ready, Nira?" Leora asked, her voice gentle but firm. Nira nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "I am ready, guardian." Leora smiled, the weight of the moment not lost on her. She had once been in Nira's place, eager to protect the spring and uphold the legacy of the guardians. Now, it was her turn to pass on the torch. Leora spent the following months training Nira in the ways of the guardian, teaching her the ancient rites of protection and the deeper connection to the sacred spring. Nira was a quick learner, but Leora knew that the true test of a guardian was not in knowledge alone, but in the heart's strength. One day, as Nira stood by the sacred spring, Leora handed her the sword of promise. The blade shimmered with the same ethereal glow it had since the day it was forged, a symbol of the promise made long ago. "The sword will be yours now," Leora said softly. "But remember, it is not the sword that makes the guardian. It is the heart." Nira took the sword with reverence, feeling its weight in her hands. For a moment, she could sense the power that had coursed through Leora, the strength of generations of guardians. She could feel the presence of those who had come before her, and it filled her with awe. As Nira stood with the sword in hand, she felt the earth tremble beneath her feet. The ground shifted, and a low rumble echoed through the air. Far in the distance, a great shadow began to rise from the horizon. Leora's expression hardened. "The balance is being disturbed. The time has come for you to face your first trial." Nira turned to Leora, her heart racing. "What is it?" "The force that threatens us is not one of darkness or light," Leora explained. "It is something older, an imbalance of nature itself. It is the heart of the abyss, a force that seeks to undo the very fabric of creation. You must face it, Nira. You must protect the sacred spring." With a deep breath, Nira nodded. The weight of her responsibility was clear, but her resolve was unshakable. She had been trained for this moment, and she would not falter. The journey to confront the heart of the abyss took Nira into the unknown regions of the worldlands that had not been touched by human hands in centuries. The air was thick with an unnatural silence, and the landscape was barren, a reflection of the imbalance that had begun to take root. As Nira approached the source of the disturbance, she found herself standing before a massive, swirling vortex of darkness, a swirling abyss that seemed to pull at everything around it. The heart of the abyss was not a creature, but a force, a wound in the very fabric of existence itself. At the center of the vortex stood a figure cloaked in shadow. It was the Abyssal Lord, a being of pure entropy, whose very presence threatened to tear apart the world around it. "You are too late," the Abyssal Lord's voice echoed, hollow and cold. "The balance has already been shattered. The spring will be mine, and the world will fall into eternal chaos." Nira gripped the sword of promise tightly, her fingers wrapped around the hilt. "I will not let you destroy the world." The Abyssal Lord laughed, a sound like the cracking of bones. "You are but a child. You cannot fight the forces of nature itself." But Nira was not afraid. She remembered Leora's words, "It is the heart that makes the guardian, not the power." With that, she stepped forward, raising the sword of promise. The blade glowed with an intense light, shining brighter than the sun. The sword was not just a weapon, it was the embodiment of hope, of life, of the promise made long ago. The Abyssal Lord's laughter faltered as the light from the sword clashed with the darkness of the vortex. The two forces collided in a blinding explosion of energy. The earth shook, and the very air seemed to warp and twist. But Nira stood firm, her heart full of courage and love for the world she was sworn to protect. She drove the sword of promise deep into the heart of the abyss, and in that moment, the darkness began to unravel. The vortex collapsed in on itself, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. The Abyssal Lord screamed in agony, his form dissipating into nothingness. With the heart of the abyss defeated, the balance was restored once more. The land began to heal, the sky cleared, and the sacred spring shimmered with renewed life. Nira returned to the village, the sword of promise by her side. The people celebrated her victory, but she knew that her journey as guardian had only just begun. There would always be forces that sought to unbalance the world, but as long as there were guardians, the light would never fade. And as the sun rose over the horizon, casting golden light over the land, Nira made a vow. She would protect the sacred spring, just as Leora had done before her. The legacy of the guardians would live on, from one generation to the next, as long as there was life to protect. The world was safe for now. But the guardians' work was never truly done. And so, the cycle continued. The victory over the heart of the abyss brought temporary peace, but deep down, Nira knew that peace was fragile. The sacred spring remained a beacon of life, but the world was vast, and its balance was delicate. As Nira stood before the spring one evening, a quiet voice called to her, soft but unmistakable, like the gentle ripple of water flowing over stone. She knelt beside the spring, her fingers brushing the water's surface. "Guardian Nira," the voice whispered. "A new trial awaits. A new darkness stirs in the depths of the ocean." Nira's heart raced as she listened closely. The voice continued, its tone urgent yet calm. "The world is out of balance once more. Only the chosen one, the sword-bearer, can stand against this threat." Nira's gaze hardened. Another threat? After all she had just faced, how could the balance be in danger again? But the voice of the sacred spring was not to be ignored. It spoke of the deep waters, of the ancient forces beneath the waves that had long been silent. A new enemy had risen, one that threatened not only the land but the very oceans themselves. A force that sought to drown the world in darkness. Nira gathered her courage, for she knew her path was clear. The sword of promise would guide her once again, but this time, the journey would take her far beyond the shores she had known. Her mission was not just to protect the land but the very essence of life that flowed through the oceans. Accompanied by a small band of trusted allies, those who had fought beside her in the battle against the heart of the abyss, Nira set sail toward the unknown. The ship cut through the dark waves, its sails billowing in the stormy winds. But the storm was no natural tempest, it was the fury of the deep that churned beneath them. The further they sailed, the darker the waters became, until the sunlight was barely a memory. The air grew thick, and the sea grew colder. Nira knew they were nearing the heart of the danger. As they approached the abyss, a massive shadow rose from the depths, blocking out the stars. The sea seemed to boil with energy, and the ship was tossed violently upon the waves. "Brace yourselves," Nira shouted, her hand gripping the hilt of the sword of promise. The blade glowed faintly in the darkness, a symbol of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. The crew held fast as the ship was thrown against a jagged rock, nearly capsizing. But Nira stood unwavering, her eyes locked onto the dark shape that emerged from the ocean. It was a creature born of the deep, its scales dark as night and its eyes glowing with a malicious, otherworldly light. The Kraken, an ancient sea beast, long thought to be a myth. But here it was, its massive form rising from the depths, its tentacles stretching across the horizon. The Kraken's roar shook the very air as its tentacles reached for the ship. Nira knew that this was no ordinary beast, it was a manifestation of the ocean's fury. A creature summoned by the same forces that had threatened the sacred spring. This was the dark force that had stirred beneath the waves, seeking to engulf the world in chaos. With a battle cry, Nira drew the sword of promise and leapt into the fray. The blade gleamed brightly, cutting through the darkness like a ray of light in the storm. Her companions followed her, their weapons flashing in the turbulent sea air, but it was clear that the creature was far beyond their strength. The Kraken's tentacles lashed out, smashing the ship and sending it sinking into the abyssal depths. Nira, with her sword raised high, dove into the water, determined to face the creature in its domain. The ocean was cold and oppressive, the pressure of the deep making every movement a struggle. But Nira was driven by the promise she had made to protect the world, and she pressed on. Her heart was her guide, the sword her shield. The Kraken swam toward her, its monstrous form moving with terrifying speed. But Nira was ready. She met the creature head-on, her sword clashing against its dark scales with a force that sent shockwaves through the water. The ocean itself seemed to recoil as the two forces collided, one born of darkness, the other of light. With each strike of her sword, Nira could feel the creature's power weakening. She was not just fighting the kraken, she was fighting the very darkness that had awakened within the ocean, the corruption that threatened to drown everything. With a final, determined strike, Nira plunged the sword of promise deep into the heart of the kraken. The creature let out a deafening roar, its form convulsing in the water. For a moment, everything went still. Then, with a final, desperate cry, the kraken dissolved into the dark waters, vanishing into the depths from which it had come. The sea grew calm, the storm subsiding as the darkness lifted. The balance had been restored, but Nira knew that the trials would never end. The world was vast, and the forces of darkness would always seek to upset its delicate harmony. The first light of day illuminated the world, casting a golden glow over the now peaceful sea. But Nira's work was far from over. The sword of promise gleamed in her hand, its light a symbol of the unbroken chain of guardians who had come before her. She knew that her journey was just one chapter in an endless story, one that would continue as long as there was a need to protect the balance of the world. As Nira returned to the land, the sacred spring welcomed her home, its waters as clear and vibrant as ever. She placed the sword of promise back beside the spring, knowing that it was not just a weapon, but a symbol of the eternal bond between the guardians and the world they vowed to protect. And so, with the dawn of a new day, Nira stood watch over the sacred spring, knowing that the legacy of the guardians would continue to shine brightly for generations to come. Years had passed since Nira's battle with the kraken, yet the peace she fought for remained fragile. One evening, as the stars began to twinkle in the clear sky, a new calling reached her, a voice she hadn't heard before. It was soft, melodic, and strangely familiar, as if the wind itself was whispering her name. Nira, guardian of the sacred spring. The voice echoed through the quiet night, drawing Nira into the forest that bordered the spring. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows and illuminating the path ahead. Her steps were light but purposeful, as if the forest itself had summoned her. Deep within the heart of the forest, she came upon an ancient oak tree, its trunk twisted with age. Beneath its roots, a faint glow pulsed, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. "Who calls me?" Nira asked, her voice carrying on the wind. The glow grew brighter, and from within the earth rose a figure, a spirit of the forest, ancient and wise. Its form was translucent, shimmering like the light of the moon. "I am Lyriel, spirit of the moonlit forest. The balance is again threatened. Darkness is growing in the east, and it seeks to corrupt the very heart of nature itself." Nira's brow furrowed. "What must I do?" Lyriel's voice was grave. "The heart of the forest is in peril. The roots that bind the lands together are being severed by a force older than the seed blackthorn. To save the land, you must venture into the heart of the forest and destroy the blackthorn before it consumes everything." With her purpose clear, Nira set off into the moonlit forest. The trees seemed to watch her as she passed, their leaves rustling softly, but she was not afraid. She had faced much worse in her travels. Yet this new enemy, the blackthorn, was unlike anything she had encountered before. It was a force of decay, capable of unraveling the delicate threads of life itself. Accompanied by a new group of Alizolds, druids, and forest guardians who had long been protectors of the moonlit forest, Nira made her way deeper into the wilderness. The forest grew denser, the air thicker with ancient magic, as though it was alive, breathing with them. As they journeyed on, strange things began to happen. The vibrant life of the forest, once so alive with the song of birds and the rustle of leaves, began to fade. Flowers wilted at their touch, and the trees seemed to lean away from them, as if the forest itself was retreating. "We're close," one of the druids whispered. "The blackthorn's influence is growing stronger. We must hurry." After days of travel, they finally arrived at the clearing where the heart of the forest lay, a sacred grove said to contain the purest essence of nature. But what they found there was not the peaceful sanctuary they had imagined. The heart of the forest was overrun by the blackthorn. Dark vines twisted and coiled around the ancient trees, choking them of life. The once pristine waters of a nearby stream had turned black, and the very ground beneath them seemed to pulse with corruption. The source of the corruption stood in the center of the grove, a towering, twisted tree, its bark blackened and its roots reaching into the earth like claws. The blackthorn had taken root, and with it, darkness spread across the land. Nira stepped forward, the sword of promise in her hand. "I will end this," she declared. But as she advanced, a sudden wave of darkness surged toward her, a manifestation of the blackthorn's will. It took the shape of monstrous, shadowy figures, creatures of the forest, twisted and corrupted by the blackthorn's power. Nira fought valiantly, her sword clashing against the darkness, but it was clear that the blackthorn's power was overwhelming. She was pushed back by the relentless force of the shadows, and for the first time in her journey, she felt the weight of her own limitations. The spirit of Lyriel appeared beside her, its form shimmering faintly. "Nira, you are not alone in this fight. Call upon the heart of the forest, and you shall have the strength to defeat this darkness." Nira closed her eyes, and in that moment, she felt a surge of energy rise from the very ground beneath her. The earth itself seemed to respond to her call. The trees around her creaked and groaned, their branches reaching toward the sky. The sacred grove began to pulse with life once again. With the forest's strength at her side, Nira took one final step forward, her sword glowing brighter than ever. The power of the heart of the forest surged through her, channeling the raw energy of nature itself. The sword of promise crackled with life, its blade imbued with the very essence of the forest. Nira raised her sword high, calling upon the magic of the heart of the forest. "By the light of the ancients, by the will of the earth, I command you to be undone." With a mighty cry, Nira plunged the sword into the heart of the blackthorn. The impact sent a shockwave through the entire forest, and for a moment, the world stood still. Then, with a terrible roar, the blackthorn's hold on the forest shattered. The corrupted tree splintered and fell, its dark roots retracting into the earth. The vines withered, turning to dust, and the blackened waters cleared. The forest seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief as life returned to its once thriving heart. The forest was saved, but Nira knew this victory came at a cost. The balance of the world was fragile, and the forces of darkness would always seek to upset it. As she stood before the heart of the forest, now restored to its former glory, Nira understood her role as guardian was far from over. But there was peace, at least for now. The sword of promise, glowing softly in her hand, was a reminder of the duty she had taken on, a promise made to the land, to the waters, and to the very earth beneath her feet. She turned to her companions, the guardians of the moonlit forest, and nodded. "Our work is not done. But for now, we rest, knowing that the forest is safe." And with that, Nira and her allies returned to the world they had sworn to protect, ready for whatever challenges awaited them next. The journey of the Guardian was eternal, but as long as there was light to guide them, they would never falter. Weeks passed since the battle with the Black Thorn, and Nira's reputation as the guardian of the sacred spring grew. Her actions had saved the moonlit forest, and the lands were at peace for now. Yet, Nira could feel an unsettling quiet in the air. Something was stirring, an ancient force that was neither good nor evil, but simply the embodiment of chaos. One evening, as the sky darkened and a distant thunder rumbled, a mysterious figure appeared on the horizon. Cloaked in shadows, the figure stood at the edge of the sacred spring, his presence a stark contrast to the calm serenity of the land. His eyes glowed like the stormy skies, full of power and something darker. Nira approached him cautiously, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady yet wary. The figure laughed softly, a sound that sent a chill through the air. "I am Zephyrus, master of the storms. And I have come to offer you a challenge." Nira frowned, unsure of what he meant. "A challenge?" Zephyrus's smile was one of amusement. "Yes. The balance you fight so hard to protect is in danger. The elements themselves are in conflict. The winds, the seas, the skies, and the earth, they are all changing, shifting in ways that threaten the very fabric of nature. You, Nira, have been chosen to restore that balance. But the price may be higher than you expect. What do you want from me?" Nira asked, her hand tightening on her sword. Zephyrus's eyes glowed brighter, and the winds began to pick up around him, swirling and howling. "I want you to face the storm trials. Prove that you are worthy of restoring the balance. Succeed, and you will gain the power needed to stop the coming catastrophe. Fail, and all that you fought for will be lost." With those words, the storm surged, lightning cracking across the sky. The challenge had been issued. Nira stood at the edge of the sacred spring, gazing out into the gathering storm. The winds howled, and the waters of the spring rippled with an unnatural force. She had faced many trials, but the storm trials were different. This was a test of her resolve, of her very understanding of the elements that made up the world. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, the sword of promise glowing softly in her hand. The storm seemed to pause for a moment, as if it were watching her. "Are you ready?" Zephyrus's voice boomed from the skies, his form vanishing into the clouds above. Nira nodded, her heart steady with purpose. "I am ready." And with that, the trials began. The first trial was the trial of wind. A fierce gust of wind blasted toward her, knocking her off her feet. The air grew thick with swirling tempests, making it impossible to see. She could feel the wind tugging at her, trying to throw her off balance. But Nira had faced strong winds before, the winds of the moonlit forest, the winds of battle, and the winds of change. She closed her eyes and let the wind flow around her, moving with it instead of resisting. She reached out, feeling the rhythm of the air, and with a single slash of her sword, she cut through the storm, parting the winds and opening a path forward. The second trial was the trial of water. A massive wave surged toward her, towering high above the trees and threatening to swallow everything in its path. Nira knew that fighting the water would be futile. It was an element she had always respected. Instead, she allowed herself to flow with the current, diving beneath the wave and swimming toward the heart of the storm. The waters pulled her down, but Nira's resolve remained strong. She reached the depths of the wave and, with a burst of energy, called upon the sacred waters of the spring. Purging the darkness that clouded the waters and letting them flow freely once more. The third trial was the trial of fire. The ground beneath Nira's feet began to crack open, spewing flames that threatened to engulf everything. She had faced fire before, but this was no ordinary fire. It was born of rage, of destruction, and of unrelenting fury. As the flames encircled her, Nira called upon the power of the sacred spring, channeling the elemental force of water and earth. She summoned a barrier of stone and water, holding back the flames long enough to forge a path through the inferno. With each step, the fire burned less fiercely, as if recognizing her strength and determination. The final trial was the trial of Earth. The very ground beneath her feet trembled as massive boulders rose from the earth, crashing down toward her. Nira had to move quickly, her senses heightened by the ever-growing power of the storm. She leapt and dodged, the sword in her hand flashing as she cut through the rocks, clearing a path to the heart of the storm. At last, she stood before a massive chasm in the earth, a rift that threatened to swallow everything. It was the final test, the trial that would determine whether she could restore the balance between the elements. With a deep breath, Nira raised her sword to the sky, calling upon all the strength she had gained through the trials. By the power of the elements, by the will of the earth, I command you to cease. She cried. The storm responded, its fury weakening as the elements calmed. The winds died down, the waves receded, the flames faded, and the earth settled. Nira stood in the stillness, her body exhausted but triumphant. She had completed the storm trials. As the storm finally dissipated, Zephyrus appeared before Nira, his form no longer shrouded in darkness. The storm that had once raged around them was now gone, and the world seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. "You have done it," Zephyrus said, his voice now calm and steady. "You have proven yourself worthy, Nira. The balance has been restored, and you now possess the power to protect the land from the coming catastrophe." Nira looked up at the sky, now clear and serene, and nodded. "I will not let the world fall into chaos. I will protect it, no matter the cost." Zephyrus smiled, his form fading into the winds. "Then go, Guardian. The balance is yours to protect. But remember, the elements are not to be controlled, they must be respected. Only in harmony can you achieve true power." And with that, the storm god was gone. Nira stood alone in the quiet aftermath, the sword of promise gleaming in her hand. The trials had been difficult, but they had strengthened her resolve. She was not just a protector of the sacred spring anymore, she was a guardian of the world itself. As she looked out over the land, a new journey awaited her, one that would take her to places beyond the moonlit forest, to the farthest reaches of the earth, sea, and sky. But whatever lay ahead, Nira was ready. With the power of balance at her side, she would face it head-on. Weeks passed, and the lands that Nira had once known began to shift. While the balance of nature had been restored, whispers of a new threat stirred among the winds. The sacred spring was calm once again, its waters clear and pure, but a shadow had begun to creep across the land, slowly engulfing everything it touched. Nira had heard the rumors, but it wasn't until one night, under the full moon's light, that the truth came to her. She stood at the edge of the sacred spring, gazing into the shimmering waters, when a soft voice called her name from the shadows. "Nira." She turned, her heart racing. The voice was unfamiliar, yet it seemed to echo from deep within her soul. Stepping forward, she saw a figure, shrouded in darkness, standing at the edge of the forest. His eyes glimmered with an unnatural light, and his presence seemed to distort the very air around him. "Who are you?" Nira asked, her hand instinctively reaching for her sword. The figure smiled, a cold, unsettling grin. "I am Azrael, the shadow of the forgotten. And I have come to deliver a message." Nira's grip on her sword tightened. "A message? What do you want from me?" Azrael stepped forward, his form flowing like smoke, his voice low and ominous. "The balance you fought so hard to restore is fragile. There are forces beyond the elements that seek to unravel it. Forces that you cannot control or defeat with your sword. And I am one of them." A shiver ran down Nira's spine as she listened. "Then why are you here?" she demanded, trying to steady her breath. Azrael's eyes gleamed with malice. "Because the time has come for you to choose. Will you protect the world you know, or will you embrace the power of the forgotten shadows? The choice is yours, Nira. The elements are not the only power in this world. The shadows have their own rule. The air around her thickened, and the shadows seemed to grow longer, stretching toward her, as if trying to pull her into the darkness. Nira stood firm, refusing to let fear consume her. "I will not choose the shadows," she said, her voice unwavering. "I will fight for the light." Azrael's smile widened. "Then you will face what you fear the most." Before Nira could react, the shadows surged toward her, engulfing the forest in a thick, impenetrable blackness. The sacred spring itself seemed to darken, its waters swirling in unnatural patterns. Nira could feel the power of the shadows trying to take control, to twist her mind and heart. But she would not succumb. The lessons of the storm trials had prepared her for this moment. She closed her eyes, reaching deep within herself, drawing upon the inner strength that had carried her through the toughest of battles. The sword of promise pulsed with a gentle light, a beacon in the oppressive darkness. With a fierce cry, Nira raised the sword high, its light cutting through the shadows like a blade through mist. The darkness recoiled, the whispers of the forgotten forces fading into nothingness. For a moment, the world seemed still, as if waiting for something to happen. Then, the shadows began to retreat, but Azrael's laughter echoed through the forest. "This is just the beginning, Nira. The shadows are not easily banished. They will return, stronger than before. And when they do, you will be forced to face the true nature of power." With that, Azrael vanished into the night, leaving Nira standing alone, the silence of the forest once again surrounding her. The shadows had receded for now, but Nira knew that Azrael's warning was not empty. The battle for the balance was far from over. The days that followed were quiet, but Nira could not shake the feeling that something was amiss. The peace she had fought so hard to restore seemed more fragile with each passing day. She spent her time in the sacred spring, training and meditating, preparing for whatever challenge lay ahead. It was during one of her training sessions that she felt a presence familiar, yet distant. The wind, once again, whispered her name. "Nira." The voice was soft but urgent. Startled, Nira turned around, her sword at the ready. But there was no one in sight. Instead, the wind seemed to swirl around her, drawing her attention to a small grove of ancient trees at the edge of the spring. A figure emerged from the shadows of the trees, a woman cloaked in silver and blue, with long, flowing hair that shimmered like moonlight. Her eyes were soft but filled with wisdom beyond her years. "Who are you?" Nira asked, lowering her sword but keeping a wary eye on the mysterious figure. The woman smiled gently, her voice calm and reassuring. "I am Alara, a guardian of the Forgotten Realms. I have watched over this land for centuries, and I have come to offer my help." Nira's eyes narrowed. "Why now? Why haven't you revealed yourself before?" Alara's expression softened with understanding. "The shadows you face now are not ordinary. They are born from the very fabric of the world's forgotten past. They seek to tear down the balance, to return the world to an age of chaos. But I know of a way to defeat them, a way that you cannot do alone." Nira's curiosity deepened. "What do you know of these shadows? And what is this way you speak of?" Alara took a step forward, her gaze unwavering. "I know the shadows are not just beings of darkness. They are manifestations of forgotten memories, ancient forces that once shaped the world, but were lost to time. To defeat them, you must go beyond the elements and find the heart of the Forgotten Realms. There, you will uncover the truth of the world's origins and gain the power to banish the shadows forever." Nira's heart raced with both fear and determination. "And how do we get there? How do I find this heart?" Alara's eyes glinted with a knowing light. "I will guide you. But first, you must face one more trial, the trial of memory. Only by understanding the past can you hope to protect the future." Nira stood at the entrance of an ancient temple deep in the forest, the air thick with the scent of ancient stone and forgotten secrets. Alara had led her here, explaining that the trial of memory would take her into the heart of the forgotten realms, where she would be forced to confront her own past, as well as the lost memories of the world. This trial will not be easy, Alara warned. The memories you face may not be your own, but they are just as real. You must confront them if you are to unlock the power needed to defeat the shadows. With a deep breath, Nira stepped into the temple, the walls covered in strange symbols that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The path ahead was shrouded in mist, and the air was heavy with the weight of centuries. As she moved deeper into the temple, she felt a strange sensation wash over her pole, as if something within her was calling out. The mist parted, revealing a large chamber. In the center stood a pedestal, upon which rested an ancient book. Nira approached it cautiously, her heart racing. The book opened on its own, its pages flipping as if guided by an unseen hand. And then, the memories began to flood her mind. That's the end of today's story. See you.